Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Turing stage for our next session, which is all about AI for science. And this session is going to showcase multidisciplinary research that's happening across labs from around the UK, from biosciences through to chemistry and astrophysics. We've got 4 great speakers for you, and after each one, there's going to be a rapid Q&A, so make sure to get your questions into the Slido while they're speaking. We don't have tons of time for Q&A, so make sure you get them in so that they're there ready for me to ask. If you see questions that you like that are already in the Slido, just upvote them and I'll ask the most popular ones first. So without further ado, let's move on to our first speaker. We have Professor Anna Schaaf, who's a Turing AI Fellow and also is at the University of Manchester. Anna's currently Professor of Radio Astronomy at Jodrell Bank Centre for Astrophysics and is also the Academic Co-Director of Policy at the University of Manchester. Her Turing AI Fellowship focuses on AI for discovery in data-intensive astrophysics. Anna, welcome to the stage. Over to you.
Gemma, and I'd like to say thanks to the organisers for inviting me. I'm going to be talking about AI for astronomy in the era of the Square Kilometre Array Telescope, or the SKA. Now, the SKA will be the world's next big radio telescope, and by some measures, the largest scientific facility on the planet. And it's designed to answer a number of key questions in modern astrophysics, such as how and when did the first stars and galaxies form out of the cold neutral hydrogen that filled the universe when shortly after the Big Bang? Can we constrain theories of gravity by mapping gravitational waves across our own galaxy using signals from networks of rapidly rotating neutron stars? More fundamentally, perhaps, understanding where cosmic magnetic fields come from, and then something that relates a bit more closely to our own humanity. Are we alone in the universe? And we can answer this by looking at chemical and molecular signatures in radio spectra that might help us to identify life on other planets. Now, to answer these questions, the global astronomy community came together and decided to build a new radio observatory. And it's an observatory that is comprised of 2 telescopes. The first of these is in the Northern Cape region of South Africa, in the Karoo, and it's comprised of 197 radio antennas in phase 1, with a proposed phase 2 that will see it spread across continental Africa out to Madagascar and Mauritius. The second telescope is in the red deserts of Western Australia, and this is a telescope that's comprised of phased array technology that allows us to access the longest radio wavelengths in the universe. The headquarters of the SKA Observatory is in a slightly less remote location, right here in the UK at the centre of the Cheshire Plain. It shares its home with the UK's own National Radio Astronomy Facility, the Jodrell Bank Observatory. And it's a partnership of 14 countries, 14 member countries and 20 participating countries. This year, it becomes an intergovernmental organisation formed by treaty. You can see the treaty signing there at the top right. This happened in 2019. But the SKA is not only large in terms of scientific scope and in terms of its international footprint, it's also big in terms of data. With a revolution in digitization over the last decade, 197 antennas in South Africa, 130,000 dipole antennas in Western Australia, the data rate out of the telescope is about 1 terabit per second, which is the compressed data. If we were to store the full data rate, the raw data rate, even from just the Australian array, we'd be looking at trying to store 5 zettabytes of data per year. And obviously for good reasons, we're not going to be doing that. Now, with that kind of volume of data, AI is going to be an integral component of analysing the output from this telescope. And the astronomy community has started to prepare for this. You should be able to see here on the left that the number of papers in astronomy that include machine learning methodology has grown exponentially over the last decade. And these cover a wide range of AI methodologies, dimensionality reduction, classification, regression, all kinds of different things. But since everyone loves astronomy images, and astronomy images are more than a pretty picture, I thought I would focus for this talk on the use of convolutional neural networks for image analysis. So here is a pretty picture from astronomy. This is an image of the sky, just a small field of view seen with the Meerkat telescope in South Africa. This is the precursor instrument to SKA phase 1 in South Africa, and it makes up about 30% of the full array, which should be completed in 2027. Now, this image shows you a myriad of different sources, tens to hundreds of thousands of objects. The radio universe is a weird and wonderful place, but I'm pretty confident in saying that the majority of the bright sources you can see in this image, they're pretty much all supermassive black holes. Now, astronomers don't tend to look at individual objects these days. More normally, what we do is a population analysis, a statistical analysis. So we'll take an image like this, and we will extract all of the objects and use that sample to constrain astrophysical models using that population analysis. And we have to do that by dividing up all the objects into their constituent classes, but also allowing for the discovery of new types of objects. And in fact, the majority, if not all, of new astronomical facilities historically have become famous, not for the science they were intended to do, but for the new discoveries that they made. So for image analysis and morphological classification, convolutional neural networks like this attention-based classifier here are very popular. Attention is quite important for astronomy because we need to know that our models are actually classifying objects based on the same subjective morphological distinctions that we as astronomers choose. So to give you an example of how we might do this, I'd like you to focus on this guy down at the bottom of the image. So this is a radio galaxy. It's a supermassive black hole powered by accretion that's shooting out ultra-relativistic jets of material into the surrounding medium, and that's causing radio synchrotron emission. Now, if I give you a bit more of a close-up on what this might look like, the image at the top left here is what we call a Phaneroff-Rayleigh class 1 radio galaxy. And you can see that the jets of emission are brightest, closest to the central black hole, and then they sort of fade away like smoke. At the bottom, you can see a Phaneroff-Rayleigh class 2 radio galaxy. Now here you can really only see one highly collimated relativistic jet, but you can make out two shocked regions where the jets are terminating as they hit the intergalactic medium. And you can see this one's not like smoke, it's quite edge brightened. Now for a standard observation, obviously not all of our radio galaxies will be as clearly distinguished as these canonical examples. So here's a little rogues gallery of radio galaxies. And you can see they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. It's a true zoo. But this kind of classification problem exemplifies some of the issues that we face in the use of AI for radio astronomy. We have large archival databases, but only small labeled data sets. So we're working in the limit of small data at the moment. We have significant and variable class imbalances in our data. Not all astronomical objects have the same prevalence in the universe. And because we use our samples for statistical analysis, we not only need the classification probability of a particular object, we also need carefully calibrated uncertainties on that model output and a quantitative estimate of the bias in our model, because otherwise that bias will propagate through into the derived astronomical parameters that we calculate. And astronomers are very sensitive to selection biases like this, because astronomy as a science is quite unusual because you can never control the experiment yourself. You only ever observe. And so the instance of selection bias is very, very important to astronomers. So let me give you a quick example of how bias can creep in. And it can be quite simple. So if I take one of my little radio galaxies, this is a Phaneroff-Rayleigh class 1 radio galaxy. And if I rotate it to a different orientation, it's still a Phaneroff-Rayleigh class 1 radio galaxy. In fact, I could rotate it to any orientation on the sky. It would still be a Phaneroff-Rayleigh class 1 radio galaxy. However, if I put this little image, this postage stamp image, into a standard convolutional neural network and I rotate it, then the feature map that I get after the convolutional layers will change as a function of the orientation. And you can see that here, where the central image is showing you the feature map from the image on the left, rotating with the image. But then if I take the rotated feature map and rotate it back to the original orientation, which is what you're seeing in the right-hand image, you can see it's still changing. And that means that the fully connected layers in the neural network actually have to classify each orientation separately. This is not specific to radio astronomy. But it can be extremely problematic for us because it introduces not only a variability in the prediction, but also a variability in the uncertainty. So we've been looking at the use of group equivariant convolutional neural networks that take into account this rotational variance to give us a stabilized view of our feature space. And then just one small extra example, which is about how AI can help us prepare for telescopes like the SKA. And this is using generative AI to produce data challenges that astronomers can help them to acclimatize to the volumes of data that the SKA will produce. So in this case, we've been looking at encoders and variations in terms of, well, this one is from a paper on variational autoencoders for producing synthetic populations of radio galaxies that astronomers can use to test out their algorithms before we get the real data from the telescope. So in summary, the next generation of radio facilities are helping us to fill in the gaps in our knowledge in how the universe evolved. But the data they produce is so large that AI is now essential for extracting scientific information. However, we have very domain-specific needs, especially in terms of uncertainty and bias. And we also need to be particularly careful not to automate out the potential for discovery. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was absolutely fascinating. I like that final point about not automating out the potential for discovery. What a profound idea, really, that's hidden in that final slide. We've got first one question that's come through so far on the Slido. We have a couple of minutes for questions. So for anyone watching, please do quickly type in your questions and we can make sure we can ask them to Anna. So this one is from Alistair Lockwood. He says, please could I ask maybe a stupid question? No such thing as a stupid question, Alistair. But if the bright images are supermassive black holes, why are we seeing them? Black holes suck in light? No.
So actually what we're seeing is the effect of the supermassive black hole. So supermassive black holes don't just suck in light, they suck in everything. So what we're seeing is the radiation from the superheated material as it gets accreted onto the black hole. And then of course we see that material that gets ejected through conservation of angular momentum that forms the jets.
Amazing.
So not a stupid question at all.
No, and quite a few people have voted for it. So it's always that way. If someone thinks they've got a stupid question, there's always other people in the audience that have the same question. I don't see any other questions coming up for you, Anna, at the moment. If there's any others that pop up later, I might bring you back in to see if you can answer them. But for now, let's move on to our next presentation to make sure we're keeping to time. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jose Miguel Hernandez Lobato. He's a Turing AI Fellow and a lecturer in machine learning at the Department of Engineering at the University of Cambridge. Part of Jose's research is in the application of machine learning to the efficient solution of expensive optimization problems. Thank you very much, Anna, and please join me in welcoming Jose, or is it Miguel? I'm sorry, I don't know which one to refer to you.
You can call me Miguel.
Miguel, I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Please join me in welcoming Miguel to the stage.
Good, thanks a lot. Yeah, in this talk, I will describe briefly the topic of my Turing AI Fellowship, and I will describe also some preliminary work that we have been doing in my group. The topic is machine learning for molecular design, and I would like to start with some motivation for the methods that I am interested in designing. It turns out that in science and engineering, there are many problems where we have to optimize some expensive black box objective function. And this objective function receives as input usually some high-dimensional structured object. And an example of this is the drug and material design problems. In these cases, our black box objective function is going to receive as input a description of a molecule, and the output is going to be some estimate of the properties of these molecules. For example, for drugs, the output of our objective function could be what is the efficacy of a particular drug for treating a disease. Or in the case of material designs, maybe if we're interested in organic photovoltaics, the output of our objective function could be the power conversion efficiency some material made out of our candidate molecule. So in general, evaluating these objective functions is very expensive. It may require to do expensive experiments that take quite a lot of time and economic cost, or we have to run expensive simulations. In general, optimizing these objective functions is going to be challenging because evaluating the properties of molecules is expensive and slow, and the space of molecular graphs is huge. So identifying the few molecules with useful properties among the many irrelevant ones is going to be quite time consuming. One recent line of work at addressing this challenging problem of optimizing over molecules consists in using deep generative models. And this is what is shown here. We have an autoencoder that is taking some molecular representation, for example, a molecular graph, and is encoding that into some continuous latent space, which is usually of low dimension. And then the autoencoder can decode back into the original molecular representation from the continuous latent space. This is really cool. We can now map molecules to a low-dimensional continuous space, and we can combine this model with a predictor of the properties of molecules from this latent space. And this will allow us to do optimization of molecules in the latent space of these deep generative models, as illustrated in this figure. You have locations of latent space, like this one that decode in a particular molecule, and as we move in latent space, we will move into regions that decode into different molecules. We can then also map these regions of latent space into the properties of the molecules, and we can follow the signal from the predictor of this property of the molecule to move into regions of latent space that decode into molecules with better properties. This is really interesting, this approach, because we now avoid working in the high-dimensional structured input space. We work in the low-dimensional continuous latent space, so we can use existing techniques for optimization, like Bayesian optimization methods that work very well in these continuous low-dimensional spaces. The generated points or the generated molecules with these models will also have similar properties to those found in real-world molecules, which is quite interesting. So this looks really good, but there are still several limitations within this approach, and this is what my Turing AI Fellowship will focus on addressing. One of the key things is that these models that I have described, they generate 2D graphs. And for example, they don't account that molecules are actually, they exist in 3D space, and they are given by the locations of the atoms in 3D space. And many of the properties of molecules depend on this 3D structure. So we are interested in coming up with generative models that generate molecules in 3D space. One key thing also is that existing models, they don't provide synthesis information. They will just generate graphs without telling you how to synthesize the molecules corresponding to those graphs in practice. These models are also not reliable, and typically they will fail, for example, if you move to regions of latent space that are far away from your training data. So we're interested in making these models robust to avoid those problems. And finally, the methods are not data efficient. If you have, for example, different data sets from other problems that you may have solved in the past, you are not able to use that to make a more efficient learning from limited data. So in my Turing AI Fellowship, I will be addressing these problems. And today I will describe briefly some current work that we have already been doing in my group related to addressing this part, which consists in now describing models, generative models of molecules that actually tell you how to synthesize the generated molecules. And what I'm going to describe here is based on some recent paper that we presented at NeurIPS very recently, just a couple of months ago. So, as I mentioned, existing deep generative models of molecules only generate molecular graphs, as shown in this figure. But in practice, we want to be able to synthesize the generated molecules. So some more reasonable way to generate molecules could be to do it in a way similar to how humans obtain molecules in practice, no? By just synthesizing new molecules from existing ones. Ideally, we would like a generative model that will, for example, generate some input reactants that are used to obtain a final product that represents the final molecule generated by the model. And this already gives you information about the synthesis of the final molecule, the product generated by the model. The advantage of this approach is that the generated molecules are more likely to be synthesizable in practice because they are generated via chemical reactions. The synthesis information is available right away as you generate the molecule. And the generated molecules, because they are obtained via chemical reactions, building on existing reactants, they are going to have more realistic properties. For example, they are going to be more likely to be stable and to be able to synthesize in practice. So how do we do this in practice? What we do is we describe the synthesis of molecules as a directed acyclic graph. And this is illustrated in this example for the molecule of paracetamol, which appears here in this final product node, which is the output of our generative model. And our model is going to generate this synthesis graph. It consists some initial building blocks shown in light blue. These are then combined to obtain some intermediate nodes and a final product node. And we call these graphs directed acyclic graphs of molecular graphs because each node in the graph is also a molecular graph. And we call them these dogs, and we call our model dog because it generates dogs. We can train this on existing data sets. For example, some data set, the USPTO dataset, which contains synthesis information extracted from the US Patent Office. And this contains about 72,000 synthesis DAGs. How does our model generate the synthesis graph? We build it into its individual components, building block nodes, and intermediate product nodes and final product node. And we generate sequentially each of these. We can think of the actions that are necessary to generate this graph. And this is shown here. We start with a building block node, which is empty. We choose its content. Then we choose to add another building block node to our DAG. And then its content, we may choose an intermediate product node. We have to connect it to previous nodes. And this is done also through some actions obtained by our generative model. And then we can fill in the content, and this can be done using a method for reaction prediction. There are many different techniques existing already, and we use something called the molecular transformer, which is a state-of-the-art method for this. You can add more nodes as follow, intermediate product nodes, until you add the final node, and you connect it to any other nodes in your graph that have no descendants. And this will be then the root of your graph. You can implement this in practice using an autoregressive model where the next action is chosen as a function of the previous ones and the current state of your DAG. And this is implemented in practice using a recurrent neural network. I won't go much into the details of this. We can then use this model to generate DAGs. In this case, we're not really using a latent space. We just have a generative model that generates DAGs. And this can actually also be used for optimization. We can just feed our model to existing data, sample from the model, keep the best molecules generated by the model, and then retrain on those best models. And we can do molecule optimization in this case, as shown in this figure, so that the molecules generated by the model are actually better than those found in the training set. But you could also connect it with some encoder, and you also can map these DAGs into latent space and then decode. How does this work for doing molecule optimization? What we find is that it works as well as existing models that don't generate molecules via chemical reactions. So this is quite good, even though our model is more constrained because it generates molecules in this way. Via chemical reactions, we are able to do as well as other models that are not as constrained. And what is interesting is that when we look at the properties of the optimal molecules found by our method, we find that most of the molecules can be synthesized in practice as validated by a retrosynthesis tool that does some brute force search for finding some synthesis route for the molecules. And the molecules are also more likely to be passing these quality filters of Whack-A-Mole, which is a benchmark tool. And this means that the molecules are more stable and easy to synthesize. So to conclude, DOG is a model that generates synthesizable molecules up front. It generates the synthesis DAGs, and it obtains competitive results in molecule generation and optimization, producing also molecules with higher degrees of stability and synthesizability. And yeah, this is some very promising work. The results that we have are on a preliminary molecule optimization problems, but we are very interested in applying this to more challenging problems, for example, in organic photovoltaics or OLEDs. I would like to finish by thanking my collaborators, my PhD student, John Bradshaw, and really great collaborators, Matt Kunzner, Brooks Page, and Marwin Segler. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for that fascinating presentation. Just an FYI for everybody who's watching, I think there's might be a little bit of a delay with the Slido, so apologies if you're sending in your questions after presentation's already finished and you're thinking you're doing it in time. You have to type very fast to make sure I get them in time to ask the researcher before we move on to the next person. So speaking of which, if you have a question for Miguel, please type quickly so that I can try and get it in plenty of time. Well, I've seen one come up, but it's for Anna, so I'm going to ask the one I have for you, Miguel, first. But please, as I say, type quickly. Don't worry if there's errors, and I can make sure I get them to Miguel. So Miguel, first question I have for you is actually just thinking about the work you're doing. What are the sort of next stages of the work, or what are you hoping to do next? Is it collaborations you're looking for, or different ways of doing your work? Tell us a little bit about the next steps.
Yeah, so I'm really excited because through this Turing fellowship, I will be collaborating with people with different backgrounds. One of them is Rafael Gomez Bombarelli. He's an expert in materials design. And I'm very excited about trying these methods that we have tried so far only on some simpler optimization problems, on more challenging ones. And the plan that we have is to apply these methods to problems where, for example, you may want to come up with more efficient organic photovoltaics. The challenge there is that you don't have synthesis information in some of the existing data sets. So you will have to think about how to combine this model that we have proposed here with additional data for which the synthesis information is not available. And this will involve combining the data from the USPTO data set with other additional data sets. And we have many interesting ideas for how to do this.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Miguel. I haven't got anything through for you yet, so I'm going to put that down to the delay. And again, what we're going to do is we'll move on to the next presentation, and then I'll take a note of some of the questions and come back to both yourself and Anna at the end to add in a few that we have missed out. But thank you so much, Miguel, for that presentation, and for everybody who's watching, make sure to get those questions in and I'll save them up for the end. Also vote for the ones that you like as well, and I'll know what's most popular. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Biao Tai, a Turing Fellow. He's a lecturer in the School of Metallurgy and Materials at the University of Birmingham, and his main role is to coordinate the Diamond Birmingham collaboration, which is a long-term collaboration established between the University of Birmingham and the Diamond Light Source, which is of course the UK's synchrotron X-ray source. So Biao, let's bring you up to the stage and hear your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm very much glad to be here to present my presentation. So I'm Biao Tai from University of Birmingham. So my talk here today is to display the beauty of glowing crystals in 4 dimensions. And as you can see from my title, I'm also saying that I'm a struggling Alan Turing Fellow. And we'll see why from my talk. So this is the outline of my talk, which is basically a start to explain what is 4D imaging, then to say why I'm very much struggling. And then I will present the main topic of the talk, the beauty of crystal growth. Then I will see what's the impact of my research on this topic. So what is 4D imaging? Basically, we are producing extremely powerful X-rays by this synchrotron source. And if you have a sample continually rotating with the X-rays shooting on it, and then we have a detector to connect this rotating image, then we can reconstruct this as a 3D image. We usually call it a CT. And if you do this extremely quickly, for example, if you can capture a tomography in less than 10 seconds, you got time resolved evolving images of our structure in 3D. That's what we call 4D imaging, okay? 3D imaging as function of time. And it's really a new technique. So basically the first paper published on this topic on this technique is in 2005, so about 15, 16 years ago, from a synchrotron at the Europe ESRF. And then there's since that time, there's continually development of this technique, and there's a lot of papers published so far, and we are publishing a few papers on these techniques as well. So, and the techniques, so as I said, it's continually increasing. The speed of scan has been decreasing from 10 seconds to 1 second. And
yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask that maybe you could pull your microphone away from your shirt? There's a little bit of scratching going on at the moment. It's making it difficult to hear you. I'm not sure if it's your microphone, but just so we can make sure we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, is that better? Or?
Yeah, I think it's always better if you don't touch the microphone bit. So if you can maybe hold it like this, that might help.
Okay, like this?
Yes, that's
okay. Thank you. So then, yes, so why am I struggling? Because this is a very typical big data issue. So every single experiment, we can generate terabytes of data. And if you have like 4 days of experiment, we can generate around 400 terabytes of data. And but this is a bit exaggerating, but we can easily generate 15 terabytes of data per experiment. So that's why I'm struggling. And this is the amount of data I collected so far. Basically, it's about 170 terabytes. You can see all of these hard drives basically sitting in my office with all the data in it. And this is the amount of data that I used for my whole PhD, which is basically 2 terabytes, a very small hard drive. And how can I analyze and really get the information from this large amount of data is why I'm struggling. And that's where comes from my Alan Turing fellowship. Basically, is try to implement the computer vision and machine learning methods to analyze and correctly interpret the 4D imaging data automatically. Okay, and I will focus on crystal growth during alloy solidification. Why I would like to do that? Basically, solidification is a very simple process. It's a frozen from liquid to solid. And a simple example is the ice crystal formation during this frozen process. So, but it's not only beautiful, so you can see this beautiful dendritic shape, but they are also engineeringly very important. For example, the turbine blades used for airplane engines, they are made of those dendritic crystals. Okay, so that's why I would like to study the crystal growth during solidification of engineering alloys. And how do I do that? So I went to those synchrotron sources. As I said, I'm a frequent user of those largest X-ray sources at Europe and in the UK. This diamond net source, okay, this one here, and we are building this facility to allow us to solidify those samples and imaging it simultaneously, okay. And then that's how we are going to show you the beauty of crystal growth. So this is the first example of the beauty of crystal growth. It's basically about this pattern and the evolution of this pattern from one shape to another. So you can see this topological transition from cellular shape to dendritic shape during one single experiment. And then this beauty is also about its cuteness. So this is one single dendrite I extracted from the array of crystals. What you see here is a transform from this very smooth interface to a dog-shaped, very cute dog-shaped crystals here, okay? So that's the beauty, as you can see, very cute. And third one is about the fighting. So those crystal grow, they are just like humans. They are actually fighting for resources and space. So for example, this showing here is one dendrite. They were growing up, but all the others surrounding it, because they don't have enough resources, they will not be able to grow in as much as these big ones. So basically, those dendrites are continually fighting for resources. And then it's also about its diversity. So basically, there is a balance of old and disold. And because of this balance, there are very different crystals can be formed during solidification. For example, you have in the left, we have the faced crystals. And on the right, we have this smooth, long-faced crystals growing. Okay, you can see the significant difference between the two. And the diversity is also about there's no single two crystals that are looking exactly the same. So you can see this is exactly the same kind of crystals, but their morphology are significantly different. Starts from very simple L shape to U shape to hollow cubic to dendritic shape. So that's about its diversity. And also about the disruption. So by applying external forces, we can significantly change this formation of crystal. Okay, so for example, this one, I add a bit of magnetic field. You can see this dendrites going from normal columnar crystals to a screw-like crystals. Okay, and we can see these disruptions by this in situ image. So you can see that it's really very disturbing. The dendritic fragments and flowing happening all around here, basically. And the beauty is also about using machine learning to help us to speed up the analysis. So this is the one example I'm showing here, is that we have very noisy tomography data, and we want to analyze this very thin, bright crystals here. And it's very difficult to use traditional segmentation methods to do this segmentation to isolate those crystals. As you can see, that's a significant difficulty here. But using a machine learning-based algorithms, we are able to successfully segment those crystals. And it's as you compare it from this image, it's actually doing a very good work, and that allows us basically to visualize those plate-shaped crystals in 3D and to analyze the tomography really quickly. So in total, we are able to analyze 200 tomograms and to be able to produce these movies as a function of time. So you can see this plate-shaped crystals growing. And what's the impact of this research? The reason why I want to mention the impact is that whenever I go to present a presentation, everybody would say, yes, it's very beautiful, but what does that mean? So yes, what's the impact? First of all, it's we can produce new knowledge by working with this topic and doing those fancy experiments. So we are able to produce a few articles recently on this topic. And another one is about to find a solution for something that unable to attack for a long time. For example, in recycling of aluminum alloys. So basically, recycling of aluminum alloys consume only 5% of energy needed for primary aluminum production. But there is a problem with recycled aluminum. That is basically you have iron, which is another element in aluminum, but it's a very detrimental element. So it's very bad for corrosion and mechanical properties of aluminum products. You want to avoid that, but there is research going on for 40 years without a proper solution. Okay. So what do we do is that we found out using this magnetic field, we can actually, we can actually move in the solid elements. So this is an example showing here, basically, as you can see that by holding the semi-solid molten aluminum alloys inside the magnetic field, we are able to form an iron-rich layer in front of this solid phase. And then by cooling it down, we can form this iron-rich intermetallics just on one side of the sample. And later on, we can remove this side of the sample. That means we remove the iron elements successfully. And we are able to obtain a patent based on this observation. And another impact is interdiscipline. So the techniques we developed actually allow us to understand the nature, because in nature, you have a lot of crystals forming, in Iceland. Now we have this magma forming, and during magmatic processing, there's a lot of crystals. And we are able to use the same technique to analyze and visualize the crystal growth during magnetic process. And you can see, we are all basically Alan Turing fellows, and Alan Turing is actually a pioneer in crystal formation, in pattern formation. Okay, he published a paper in 1954 to try to use the algorithm to understand the morphologies during a chemical process. And what he observed or predict in his algorithms are actually fit on very well with what we observed in our experiments. So yes, and I think that's my talk, and thank you for listening and watching.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Biao, for taking us through. And I really enjoyed your thing about being a struggling fellow. It's nice to see a little bit of honesty sometimes when we're seeing these talks, and to hear a little bit about the challenges. I wonder what again, sort of same question that I asked Miguel, what you see moving forward, either potential for your project or what the next steps are, or indeed perhaps what you think the next struggles might be for yourself.
I think what we are doing now is trying to build up hardware to be able to analyze in such huge amount of data, not only for myself, but also for the community. So we are getting fundings to build up, machine learning based computer architectures to be able to allow us actually quickly to analyze this amount of data generated in synchrotron sources. That's the next step. Of course, for myself, my research, we are continuing to work on this, crystal growth area and try to find out, some fundamental mechanisms controlling the crystal growth. Yes, thank you.
Amazing. Let's go to, we've got a question through from Alistair Lockwood. Why should there be so much difference in growth between faceted and non-faceted crystals?
It's back to the atomic scale information. Basically, I believe is that there are different mechanisms controlling the two different growth morphologies. So that's what we are looking at. Exactly what kind of mechanisms they are different, because in crystal growth there are traditional classical crystal growth mechanism. Basically, that's the atom-to-atom attachment. But then there's another growth mechanism, which is basically the sub-nanoscale particle-to-particle attachment. So these different mechanisms, they will, in a way, to influence the morphology of the crystals. That's what we are looking at the moment.
Brilliant.
That's a very good question.
No worries. We've got another question that's come through. It's got some upvotes as well, so clearly people want me to ask this to you. This is from Carolyn Ashurst. She says, thanks. Is there a culture of widely sharing data within the scientific subfield, given how large these data sets are? What infrastructure is in place for this?
That's a very good question. I think that's the data in general are all accessible through this through the diamond and also other synchrotron sources. But the big problem I see is the nodes, experiment nodes that are generally not accessible. I think there's a lot more work to be done to allow those large, those data sets generated by those sources to be able to available to others to analyze.
Thank you very much, Biao, for your presentation, for answering questions. Again, if anybody has sent through any that I haven't got to just yet, we'll store them up, and if we have time at the end, we can ask them to Biao. So thank you so much for giving us your presentation, Biao. And we're going to move on to our final presentee for this session. So we have Dr. Andy Hawk. Andy is Vice President of Product at Cerebras. Andy was previously at Google, where he led data and analytics product for the Terabella project, using deep learning and AI to create useful data for maps and enterprise applications from satellite imagery. Andy, welcome to the stage. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Turing Institute for hosting our talk, and also to the co-panelists for the awesome presentations before this. My name is Andy Hawk. I'm the head of product at Cerebras Systems, where we are building a new type of computer processor, a new class of computer system to accelerate computation for AI by orders of magnitude beyond what's possible with existing computing infrastructure. By way of background, I did my academic work in geophysics and space physics, particularly for planetary science research. I'll be speaking to you today about a new computing solution that can accelerate AI for science across multiple domains. I think we widely recognize that AI has incredible potential in industry for applications ranging from digital media to autonomy and robotics. But of course, as we've heard here already, AI also has transformative potential for science, from applications ranging from astronomy data processing to molecular design, crystal growth, and material science, as we've heard from our panelists already. And also, of course, health and life sciences, from the landmark work done by DeepMind this year on AlphaFold, predicting protein structure from sequence data, and the vast and growing body of literature around AI to help identify potential therapeutics for COVID-19, as well as applications in climate and environmental science, other large scientific instrument processing. There's many applications that could benefit from AI to accelerate innovation. However, AI for science is constrained by computing infrastructure today. Data sets for science are massive, growing, and often sparse. The models used to capture the variability of that data are often on the order of hundreds of millions to trillions of parameters. This large data and large models leads often to days or weeks of compute time to train a model just once, even on clusters of tens to hundreds or more of legacy general purpose processors such as GPUs. And as the figure on the right, produced by some research from OpenAI in 2018 shows, the challenge is actually growing. What they showed in this work was between 2012 and 2018, the compute requirements for the largest AI model training runs grew by a factor of 300,000x at an exponential rate faster than Moore's law, which essentially means that the compute requirements for deep learning are growing faster than traditional computing techniques can keep up. Today's processors have delivered incredible results as processors like GPUs and CPUs. We've made tremendous advances. However, those processors were fundamentally built for other work and have been repurposed to perform neural network computation for AI. Additionally, these processors, because of their design, are often inefficient and challenging to scale. And so at Cerebras, we see this as an opportunity to build the right processor for AI. And this is the processor that we have designed and built. We call it the wafer scale engine. This is the largest computer chip ever built. It is a single 8.5 inch by 8.5 inch unbroken piece of silicon with 400,000 individually programmable cores designed from the ground up to accelerate the sparse linear algebra computations that are central to neural network compute, as well as many other scientific HPC applications. In addition to those compute resources, this chip also has 18 gigabytes of fast on-chip SRAM memory that's all accessible within a single clock cycle from its associated compute core. And each core is connected directly to one another over a 2D interconnect mesh, a network on chip that's fully configurable in software. So essentially, this device delivers the compute resources of a deep learning cluster, all on a single chip. Now, from an engineering standpoint, once we arrived upon this novel large-scale design, we had to think about a few things. But first, let me just illustrate the scale of development of the wafer scale engine. At the right is the largest chip built previously. This is a NVIDIA Volta V100, 54 billion transistors and about the size of a postage stamp. On the left is our wafer scale engine with over 1 trillion transistors and the size of a small dinner plate. By bringing together the compute and memory and network resources onto a single chip, we can execute neural network and deep learning workloads much more quickly. But with this design, we had to fundamentally rethink the system, as we couldn't simply put this wafer scale processor into a laptop like the one I'm presenting from, or a desktop machine, or even a commodity server for a data center. So our systems team developed and built the server shown here, which we call the CS1. This is our flagship product, the system that we are building and delivering to researchers and industry alike today. It's the world's fastest AI computer. It's powered by one of those massive wafer scale engines. It fits into a standard data center rack and is about the size of a small hotel room refrigerator. And in this single system, we deliver the performance of many tens to hundreds or more GPU systems. So from a data center perspective and from an energy efficiency perspective, we're able to replace racks of legacy general purpose equipment with a single machine, less than a single rack. But for those of you data scientists and researchers in the audience, you may be wondering, well, what about programmability? And so we at Cerebras have developed a software stack that allows you to work in the common Python-based open source ML frameworks of today, such as PyTorch and TensorFlow. And we've developed a software stack that lives beside those ML frameworks and automatically extracts, translates, and compiles your training or inference task to run as an executable on our machine as a network attached accelerator. So this allows the CS1 and the wafer scale engine to be easily programmed with today's ML frameworks. We have a lower level set of APIs that allow for customization and extensibility to other applications. All in all, we've built the software stack to meet you as a data scientist or researcher where you work today, minimize changes, and give you access to cluster scale AI compute without having to think about how to orchestrate a cluster of many small devices, giving you the programming ease of a single node. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit more about some of the scientific applications by giving some highlights of work that our partners in this space have done. We've been working for several years now with partners in the US Department of Energy, notably at Argonne National Laboratories. Our colleagues on research teams there are using the CS1 today for models, deep learning models associated with predicting cancer drug response, to model protein folding, to identify potential therapeutics for COVID-19, and also for models to understand and classify gravitational wave data from colliding black holes for astrophysics problems. And across the board for those various network architectures, such as fully connected, convolutional variational autoencoders, and convolutional neural nets, we're seeing orders of magnitude gain in performance and a corollary reduction in wall clock training time. As Rick Stevens, the Associate Lab Director, said, there are models that are running many hundreds of times faster on our device than on a conventional GPU. But what this performance really translates to in terms of science is the ability to test more ideas per unit time. And as he says, allows their team to do in a few weeks or a few months what would normally take months or years. But it's not just accelerating the neural network architectures of today, not just making benchmarks go faster. We've fundamentally built this machine as a research instrument. The background in astronomy, I often think of this machine as somewhat of an AI observatory. And a good example of this work is that our partners at GlaxoSmithKline were intrigued and have deployed one of our machines, not just to accelerate existing models for drug discovery and pharmaceutical development, ranging from language models like BERT to graph-based neural networks and other architectures, but they're particularly interested in this device because it allows them to develop neural network architectures and employ ML methods and algorithms that simply aren't practical or efficient on their existing infrastructure. As Kim Branson said, they can build things that we can't build as easily on other distributed architectures because of the large single node architecture of this device. And last but not least, I'm very excited and a little disappointed that I can't travel right now, but we are deploying a machine to the UK, to the EIDF at Edinburgh Parallel Computing Centre in Edinburgh. We recently announced this, and as Professor Mark Parsons, the director of EPCC, has said, the machine, the CS1 at EPCC, will be used for applications across data science, ranging from genomics to public health in the UK, as well as being used for continuing time-sensitive research, such as AI for COVID-19 therapeutic development. So we're very excited about this upcoming deployment. I'll conclude by saying, once again, thank you to the Turing Institute for inviting me, as well as to my panelists and to the audience for your time. I'm very happy to introduce this machine to you and share some of the exciting work that we've been able to do with our partners to accelerate scientific research by orders of magnitude, allowing our partners to train models in minutes or hours rather than days or weeks, accelerating the ability to innovate at a lower cost of curiosity. And I'll also say that this machine for us, while it's a big step forward, is just the beginning. We've recently announced the development of our Generation 2 device, and we're very much looking forward to accelerating science further and working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and for that rousing end to your talk as well. It's really great to have here today, of course, with the tone of the whole conference. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions through already for you. One has 6 votes, so everybody wants to know the answer to this question, which of course is the golden question. How much does the wafer scale engine cost?
I wish I could take orders. So think of the CS1 as being around the cost of a small cluster of GPUs. So we deliver greater performance, say, than tens to hundreds of GPUs, and our cost, while it's not public, feel free to email me and ask. Our cost is better on a price performance basis than that.
Amazing. Thank you for clarifying. I think it looks like you've got, there's 9 votes now. There was 6 a wee minute ago. So it looks like you've got a line of eager customers starting to build up here.
We are building and delivering these systems today, and we also have research partnerships. So please feel free to find me by email or LinkedIn.
There you go. All 10 of you who've upvoted that, there's your answer. Okay, let's go into a new question for you. How do we offset the environmental factors of this increase in computing power and adoption of AI? How mindful are we in the balancing of pros versus cons?
That's such a great question, and I think it's one that we want to do even more work on. So from a power standpoint, a device like this has several advantages over a traditional cluster. We save on communication. We execute more efficiently. We also don't multiply by 0, so we can handle sparse data without spending kilowatt hours or compute cycles or time on those sparse problems. So I think a device like this is a big step forward in that, but I think we as a community still have a long ways to go, both in compute efficiency, but also in designing neural network models and ML methods that don't just build larger models, but build smarter models that learn more efficiently with fewer compute requirements. And a device like ours is designed to support those kind of flexible, novel ML methods to build smarter, not just bigger as well.
Thank you, Andy. We've got another question for you here from Mark Basham. Really interesting talk. Thanks, smiley face. What's the I/O outside of the unit, i.e. network connectivity?
Oh, great question. Thanks. And I didn't want to dive too deeply into specs, but I appreciate the opportunity. So a processor like this obviously consumes quite a bit of data. And actually, you can see in the picture shown here, we connect to your adjacent infrastructure over actually standard 100 gigabit Ethernet. But because we require such big bandwidth to keep our machine busy, we have 12 100 gigabit Ethernet links. So a total system level I/O of 1.2 terabits per second.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to very quickly ask one question of Anna and one question of Miguel that have came through, and then we'll have to wrap up because we are very close to time. So Anna, let me pick this question that came from Mark. Do you make use of any of the citizen science projects like Zooniverse for gathering data for training?
Yes, so that's a good question. Yes, so we do. we use both the Galaxy Zoo and the Radio Galaxy Zoo. The labels that are provided by the citizen science projects are not necessarily the ones that we need for our analysis, is the slight drawback. Also, even with the help of, I think it's 12,000 citizen scientists now in Radio Galaxy Zoo, the labeling still doesn't scale. So in fact, we use those as inputs to active learning algorithms in order to provide new labels.
Thank you, Anna. And a very quick question for Miguel before we wrap up. This is from Chris Williams. I was not clear if your learned model helped with backward chaining, i.e. to identify a synthesis for a target molecule. Could you briefly touch on that, Miguel?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yep, I was not clear if your learned model helped with backward chaining, i.e. to identify a synthesis for a target molecule.
Yeah, that's right. So this is quite interesting. I didn't describe this in the talk, but we use this autoencoder model that can map, you can map data to the continuous latent space, and then you can decode and you obtain a synthesis tree. So one thing that you can do is actually to take existing molecules and try to map them to the location in latent space where they would fit in, and then decode, and you will obtain like a corresponding synthesis tree for that molecule. So this is a form of retrosynthesis. This is usually called retrosynthesis in the literature. And it's something that we have tested, not in this particular work, but in an early stage version of this work. And that worked relatively well. Retrosynthesis tools are better because they are like exhaustive brute force methods, and with enough compute, they will always do better than this. But you can also try to do retrosynthesis in this way. It's something that we probably wouldn't recommend, but it's possible.
Thank you very much, Miguel. And thank you so much to all our researchers today, to Andy, to Anna, to Jose, and to Biao for coming and sharing your work for the audience, and of course, answering all of your questions. It's been an absolutely fascinating session. So thank you so much for joining us. This stage is actually going to be empty next. So please go and to all the audience, go and join us over on the Enigma stage in about 5 minutes, maybe just slightly less than that, for the next session, which is going to be titled Doing Better in Data Science. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and watching.